Certainly one of the things that we know firsthand experience as freelancers, but as people trying to run this business as well, is the value of time and the value of our time and making the most of our time. And we know that as freelancers, it's a constant challenge. It's something that we hear back quite a bit from every freelancers. How do you kind of balance that thing of working on clients' businesses, managing your own time as a freelancer, managing demands of a family or friends, and then your own personal time as well? It's a real big challenge. And that's why when Una and I were talking about what should the next session be about, we just felt it should be around that area of time management. We just felt, to excuse the pun, that it was very timely to do it. But anyway, that's the worst pun that you're probably going to hear today. One of the things that Una and I have heard from talking to people in our community is that it's that thing of wearing different hats. You're trying to, say, manage client work, get a new business, manage the accounts, getting paid, marketing yourself, and all of the other things that go about being a solopreneur or being a freelancer or running your own business. It's a really difficult thing for everybody to manage, or anybody to manage. And luckily our paths crossed with our guest today, Sarah Duran. Sarah runs her own brilliant freelance consultancy business called Fruition Initiatives. And she's an absolute black belt. From the conversations that we've had, the work that we see her doing, she's an absolute black belt, as I say, in this whole area of maximizing your billable time as well as your unbillable time. And she'll talk about that in the course of her talk today. Just a little bit of background on Sarah, for those of you who don't know her. She spent a number of years as an expert project manager for a number of very large organizations, particularly in the educational area in North America. Her home base is Denver, Colorado, as I mentioned, and that's where she's coming from for us today. And before going independent and setting up her own business, that's largely what she did in that project management area. She's now turned to helping freelancers help turn their ideas into action and bring their goals to fruition. She has built a really strong business in a whole variety of areas, but particularly as a coach for freelancers, solopreneurs, small agencies, small businesses generally. And she's designed a number of frameworks, which she'll share one of them with us today, that I think really help to get people to focus on the things that matter as far as time is concerned. So she is going to share that framework with us. She has kindly said to me as well that she's happy to distribute the slides through us later on. So take notes if you like, but I think pay attention for the next 40 minutes or so. And I think hopefully everybody will get something really useful out of this. So Sarah, again, you're very welcome. We're really delighted to have you. And the Indie Zoom room is yours.
Great. Thanks, Peter. I'm so happy to be here. And the first thing I want to do is just, I think, Peter, you gave a great intro. And sorry, it's very dark here. So my light is a little bit of a moving target. And you might also hear my toddler wake up at any moment. So I'm just going to give that warning too. The first thing I want to do is just give you a little bit more background about who I am and honestly why it matters. So like Peter said, I'm a freelance project manager. I've been doing that on my own for about 6 years. And in total, I've been a project manager for, a little over a decade now. And about 6 years ago, I decided to go out on my own, mostly because I was tired of people telling me what to do, telling me what I was worth, and telling me how to organize my time and my day. And I'm a big believer in I'm not a business guru. I'm not a person that only coaches people. I spend 75% of my time freelancing. And so these are strategies and frameworks and techniques that I put to use in my own business every day. So I'm not here to give you a bunch of advice and theoretical information about what I think works. These are things that actually work for me. And I'm super passionate about people working for themselves, freelancers, consultants, solopreneurs. And you'll see at the end that I have a lot, over the last few years, I've been building a lot of ways that I can help the freelance community. So I'm super excited to be here. And this will be, I'm going to go a little bit high level on a lot of this, but I'll tell you about a couple of ways that you could go deeper on this content in particular. I have a couple of other free workshops that will be doing this content in a longer format coming up. Okay, so when you start working for yourself, you are mostly looking at the flexibility, the control. Sometimes it's the money. There's a lot of reasons people start working for themselves. And quickly you begin to realize that you actually wear a ton of other hats. So you're also a project manager. You're a marketing expert. A lot of you actually are marketing experts. So that's at least within your wheelhouse. You have to do sales and you have to do operations. So you're doing billing. You're sometimes being an accountant. You're sometimes being a customer service expert. And when you work for yourself, by yourself, ultimately, you only have so much time in the day. And that's why I created Be the Boss of Your Time. So like I said, I'm going to run through what we're going to cover today. And I'm going to offer another longer extended version of this for free for another organization in the US in a few weeks if you want to get an extended version. And I also offered this content as a free challenge on my website that you can sign up for, and I'll basically walk you through it step by step. So I'm not going to go super in depth because I want to make sure that we have time for questions, but I'll go at a high level through the entire framework today. So here's what we're going to cover. The first thing we're going to do is get a baseline of how you're spending your time now and think a little bit into the future about how you want to be spending your time. We'll look at analyzing your billable and your non-billable work. We'll think about what needs to change. So once you do that analysis, you're able to look at ways that you're spending your time that are actually not working for you. But we won't just identify what needs to change. We'll also talk through strategies of how to change it and to prioritize what you need to change first. Excuse me. And finally, we'll talk through some ways that you can create your ideal work conditions for your ideal day, week, and month. And I will pause at a couple points throughout for questions, and definitely at the end. And if you have questions, you can put them into the chat as we go as well. And I just like to always, this is my time quote that I like to ground us in before we get started. Okay, so the first part is getting a baseline of how you're spending your time now. So most people decide to work for themselves because, like I said, you want the flexibility, you want to do something that you love, you're tired of other people telling you what to do, you want to make more money. And for a lot of solopreneurs, sometimes that goal starts slipping away after a while when you're spending a lot of your time doing things that you actually don't love and maybe aren't that good at. And so the first step in any process is setting goals for the journey. So whether it's your company or your life, and obviously both of those are completely intertwined, the first step is to take a moment to get clear on where you are now and where you want to go. There's a full workbook that they'll send out after this with the slides, and all of this is in there. You'll see me walk through a couple of analysis templates and things like that. So y'all get all of that after we get off the webinar. So the workbook will have these reflection questions for thinking about how you spend your time. I'm not going to go through each one of them in depth now, but I do want to call your attention to a few of them in particular. So there's a few that are asking about what you want your ideal time to look like. So how many hours do you actually want to be working in a week? What does your ideal day, week, and month look like? And the other ones that I want to point out are these ones about barriers. So once you've identified what your ideal is, what's holding you back from achieving that? And to get us started, I'm going to be spending the next 20 minutes or so just really talking at you a lot. And so I wanted to get us started with just a way that we can interact a little bit. So if you want to put in the chat, what's your biggest barrier to living your ideal day, week, or month? Mm-hmm. That's a great one, Una. So this is something I hear from a lot of freelancers a lot. Yep, exactly. So this like feast famine mentality where, and I 100% fall into this trap too, where you're like, I have to take that job or that client now because what if they're not there later? Totally. Yes, absolutely. Family stuff, guilt that I shouldn't be enjoying my free time. That's a huge one. I just wrote a few blogs about that exact topic, about actually resting and taking rest. Yes, totally. Money is a huge one. Yes, Jennifer, I run into that problem all the time with childcare. Yes. Work-life balance, working from home. Perfect. Yep. Awesome. Okay, so that will just help you think about orienting yourself as we go through the rest of this. So once you get your baseline, then we're going to look at your billable work. So there's a lot of ways to think about billable work. I tried to give some generic categories of billable work that kind of cross all different types of freelancers. And I think these are pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through each one of them in depth. All of this will be in the workbook that you get afterwards. But these are generally the types of billable work that people do. And so when we get to the analysis part, this is one of the ways we'll be categorizing the work that you do. And one thing to call out here is that some of these things take a lot more time and energy than others. And so it's always a balance between not just your billable and your non-billable work, but also the types of billable work that you're doing and what you actually want to be focusing your time on. So when you're analyzing your billable work, I have 5 criteria that you're going to use to look at that. The first one is revenue. So revenue, really thinking about your time versus money equation. And so at the simplest level, you want to be focusing your time on things that take the least amount of time for the most amount of money. But I'm also a huge believer that it's not just about work. Work should serve your life. You didn't go out on your own just to do things you hate all the time. So you also want to be doing things that you love. And so all of these things are going to fit together. The next one is significance. And the way that I think about this is really about your business model. So are you spending your time on activities that are crucial to your work and business model? Depending on your work, you might actually have some flexibility to focus on different areas and still accomplish what you need to get done. So one example of that would be you do marketing strategy and you love the strategy piece of it, but you actually are spending too much of your time on planning or just responding to people. And so we'll think about some ways that you might be able to shift the way you're spending your time on some of those activities. The next one is the amount of time. And so in the analysis, we'll look through, this will be a little bit subjective, but in general, you can really think about how you're currently spending your time and the ideal way you want to be spending your time. And then the last ones are fit together. So preference and skill. Are you doing what you love? Are you doing what you're good at? What you love and what you're good at are sometimes going to be the same, but it's also possible that you love something that you're not that great at yet. And those are often some of the things that are truly exciting and giving you the passion to want to do what you're doing. You're learning new things. And it's also going to be the case that you're ultimately going to have to do things that you don't love. And that's just part of being a business owner. Okay, so let's look at the analysis. So this template, like I said, this template will be in your workbook, and the workbook is fully editable. And so it's an Excel sheet. I encourage you to edit it. So like I said, these categories on the left-hand side are my best attempt to create categories that go across all different types of work. And I've got one other category, but you can also just change these categories to fit your needs. And we're going to walk through an example together. So I'm going to say that I'm a social media strategist, and I'm going to look at information gathering. So right now, information gathering is taking me a ton of time, and it's not bringing me in a lot of money because I often do a lot of that work before I even set up the contract. And it's crucial to my work. I have to get that information up front to be able to actually execute what I need to do and satisfy my clients. I like it, but I don't love it. I'm pretty good at it. Right now, I'm spending 40% of my time on it, and I'd really like to be spending more than around 10% of my time on it. So that's one example. And in some of the subsequent steps, I'll show you how you would use this and then identify which areas need to change, and also some ways to change them. Okay, so we've done the baseline. We've talked about billable work. Let's talk about non-billable work. So again, these are some categories of non-billable work that kind of go across all different types of freelancers. And when we get to the analysis part, I will again encourage you to edit it. Non-billable work are all those things that you have to do that you're not getting paid for, but because you work for yourself, it's your responsibility to do them. And when you're analyzing your non-billable work, you'll see that you're using generally the same criteria, but we're not looking at revenue because it's time that you're not getting paid for. And when we're looking at significance, really we're asking who does it. So a lot of your non-billable work are things that you could potentially outsource to other people. There's obviously a financial component there. I find that a lot of solopreneurs end up doing a lot of things themselves. And I definitely have fallen and still fall into that category. But I've learned ways that I can think about strategically outsourcing things that are super important for my business, but I'm not that great at or take up a bunch of my time. Okay. So when you do your non-billable work analysis, like I said, you're pretty much doing the same process. And so let's pretend I'm that same social media strategist, and we'll talk about marketing. So I do all of my own marketing. I'm neutral about it. I don't love it. I don't hate it, but I'm really good at it. It's what I do. And so I'm really fast at it. Currently, I spend about 5% of my time on it, and I think that's probably fine to spend 5% of my time on it because it's something that I'm really good at, and so I'm pretty efficient at it. Okay, so we've gone through, we've got your baseline, we talked about billable, non-billable work. Now we're going to look at prioritizing your work, and then I'll pause and have a chance for questions before we cover the last piece. So this is, in my opinion, the most important step. I work with a ton of freelancers who, and it's not just freelance, it's literally everyone who wants to change something about their work or their life. It's sometimes easy to look at what needs to change, and it's hard to actually figure out a way to change it. So I think we all sometimes have a laundry list of these are all the things that need to change in my work or my life. But actually changing them is where the rubber hits the road. And so there's this is a 3-part strategy to really think about that intentionally. The first thing you're going to do, and we'll go through each one of these steps in depth. The first thing you're going to do is identify what needs to change. We'll talk through some specific strategies about how to change it. And then you're going to prioritize what do you need to change first. So if you have a long list of a ton of things that need to change, you're going to have to figure out what you do first. Okay, so when you think about what needs to change, there are 5 criteria here. And the thing that you want to keep in mind with this is that they all fit together. So it's not just one of these things being true that means that you need to change something. It's really a combination of multiple things being true. So the first one is it low revenue? So is it really not bringing in any money? Is it not crucial to your work or your business model? Do you hate it? Are you not that good at it? And is it taking up too much time? And like I said, you're not going to get rid of anything just because it takes up too much time or just because it's low revenue. So it's really throughout that analysis, you'll be able to see the things that are hitting on multiple of these criteria at the same time. And those are the things that you're going to zero in on to change. So once you've identified the things that need to change, the next step is to figure out how to change them. And when you're thinking about time and money and billable and non-billable work, there are 4 main strategies that I use when I'm helping people think about how to change what they do. So the first one is let it go. So can you literally restructure your time or your business model or what you do so that you can do less of it or not do any of it at all? So an example of this is maybe you have a website and you spend a ton of time creating, updating your website, but you actually get most of your work through referrals. And so a lot of people don't actually even go to your website. And so is that something you could let go? Is it actually crucial to what you do and how you find work? And this is good for things that are low revenue, not crucial, that you don't love, and that you're not good at. The next one is, can you place limits around it? So there's a lot of things that you have to do. Like checking email is a great example of that. Can you place limits around it so that you're just more efficient? You can't get rid of it. And emails, like I said, email is a great example of this. So perhaps you spend a ton of time throughout the day just checking your email constantly. Can you place limits around that? So maybe you say to yourself, I'm going to only check my email 30 minutes 4 times a day. And you put those little blocks on your calendar. And in between those time periods, you're not even looking at your email. That's a way to limit something that you definitely have to do. This one is good for things that are low revenue. They actually are important or peripheral to your work, but you don't really love them and they're taking up too much time. The next one is, can you build a structure around it so that it takes less time and is more replicable? And this is basically the basis of a lot of the things that I teach people how to do. So as you know, I'm a project manager. Structure, process is my thing. And the bulk of my other courses teach freelancers how to create processes in their work. So an example of this one would be, it takes you forever to create proposals. You're spending a ton of time on proposals. You obviously aren't winning them all. And so that's unbillable work that you're spending a ton of time on. So an example of a way you could create a structure around that is, could you create an intake form? So instead of having a call with your clients, you're giving them an intake form that they fill out, and then a proposal template. So you're literally just copying and pasting from your intake form to your proposal template and getting it out the door. This one is good for literally everything. So I would say, if you're going to do one thing, build more structures into your work so that the things you do are more replicable and you're not reinventing the wheel every single time. And the final one is outsourcing it. So can someone else do this better, faster, or cheaper? A trap that I have fallen into several times is with social media ads. And so I spend like a ton of time learning how to do social media ads, setting them up, and then I spend all the money on the ads. And I don't see any results because I don't know how to run social media ads. And so it actually turns out to be cheaper and faster, and I get better results if I pay someone else to do that. This one is good for things that are low revenue, are still important to your work, but that you don't love, take too much time, or you're not good at. Okay, last step in this process, and then we'll take a quick break for questions before I do the last piece. So now that you've done all of that, you've done the analysis, you've got the information you need, you're going to take those two pieces that we just talked about, and you're going to actually prioritize what needs to change. And we'll go through one more example here. So I'm still my pretend social media marketer. I know that information gathering is low revenue and it is taking up too much time, but I can't let it go, limit it, or outsource it. But I could build some structures around it. So this is where I'm going to take my example of that intake form, and I'm going to build a structure so that something that I have to do anyways now takes up less of my time. This is going to be high value, but low effort. And as you go through this, when you have this multiple of these rows filled out, and then you can really look at the things that need to change. But in this last two columns, where you're thinking about value and effort, you'll be able to pick the one that you can do first. So I think the high value, low effort ones are the easy ones to pick to do first. You're probably going to have some that are high value and high effort. And those are things that you may prioritize working on over a longer period of time, but this at least gives you some quick wins. So I can do these 3 things right now to start using my time more effectively, and then think about a longer term strategy to do some of those things that are going to take a little bit more effort. Okay, so let me pause. I have one more section after this, and then we'll do questions at the end, but let me pause here and see if there are questions before I go.
One, Sarah, that was asked earlier on by Sean. So this is when you were showing the chart that had how do you define billable work, and you had a variety of different elements to that. So you had responding, reviewing, managing, planning, creating, and so on. And I suppose the question indirectly is some of these activities aren't separately billable. So how do you kind of put them into boxes that you can go to a client and say, well, look, that's why I'm billing you for those hours or that activity or whatever it might be?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it's a little bit of 2 separate things that you want to think about a little bit differently. So this analysis is really going to help you think about how you're spending your time. And it's not necessarily giving you like a line by line way that you're going to bill your clients. You're not necessarily saying like, you might be in some of those ways. You might be saying, let me go back to that slide real quick, actually. For some of those things, you might be building in those things into your bill. So a lot of times I will, go back. A lot of times I will actually put an area in my proposals and my bills where I'm literally billing them for the planning time. So that could be an example of how you are using that as a line item in your invoices or in your proposals. But in general, it's a little bit tricky, but I would say when you're doing the analysis, don't necessarily think about, like, you're going to think about the revenue in general. Is this high value and like high revenue and low time? So that's like one criteria to think about it. But really the point of this is to think about how you're spending your time, and do you like how you're spending your time? And that doesn't always translate one-to-one in the way that you're billing your client. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we see quite a bit from talking to and dealing with the freelance community is that you tend to price on the basis of outputs. So the work that's done, and the piece of design, the piece of copy, the project that you've completed or whatever. But what people probably need to think about is the inputs as well. And I know from an agency point of view, kind of agencies have got into that mode of where clients have beaten them up and said, we're only going to pay for the outputs at the other end. But they have a way of building in the thinking time, the time before the actual output as part of their overall costs. And I think more and more freelancers need to think about it from that point of view as well. And what we encourage people to do is to, while they quote hourly rates and daily rates, they're great, they're an indicator, But we always say to freelancers, look for the scope of work. What does the client want you to do, and how much time roughly is that going to take? And most people, experienced freelancers have a good sense of the amount of thinking time and preparation time that goes into the output at the other end. And they absolutely need to factor that in as part of their overall proposal in terms of cost. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that I have a blog about this too, about flat rate versus hourly rate. So if you're charging per deliverable versus charging hourly, and it's exactly that. It's exactly that advice that I give people, is that if you're doing something that you've never done before and you don't know exactly how much time it's going to take you, for sure use an hourly rate. If it's something that you have done over and over again, and you're like, I know that this is going to take me this amount of time, then a per deliverable rate might be a better bet. But that's always going to be a little bit of a balance. But yeah, I would totally say build as much of that peripheral time. That's not the actual, on this one, it's not the actual creating. It's the planning or the responding or the information gathering. The more that you can build that in to your pricing structure, the better.
Una has one here as well, Sarah as well. It's so as a solopreneur, I'm slow to outsource work because of cost. Again, any advice on how to reframe this? I think we're all very cautious about, because money coming in, you're always, you want to minimize the money going out at the other end. So any advice in that area?
I mean, it is a constant balance and adjustment. I would say that that has shifted for me over the course of me running my business. So in the very beginning, I definitely did everything myself. I still do a lot of things myself. I think there's also something, especially with non-billable work, is that there are pieces of it. I'm just going to scroll forward. There are some pieces of your non-billable work that maybe you actually like. And so an example of that is, I am very particular about my finances. And so I have an accountant, but I do all my own bookkeeping. Is that maybe the best use of my time? Not always, but I actually really like it. And it helps me feel in control of my money. And so that's an example of, even in the non-billable work arena, you actually do want to be thinking about what you like and what you don't like. In terms of outsourcing, I would say that it's always going to be a balance. So there are things that I will outsource, and then I was maybe I shouldn't have done that. I could have just done it myself. But the criteria I always use is can someone do it better, faster, cheaper? So that social media ads example that I gave is, for me, a perfect example, because something that I'm not good at and I have no idea what I'm doing, and the amount of time it takes me to get good at that isn't worth it. And so I have to think strategically about how and if to outsource it, or how to just not do it. Maybe that's just not the advertising strategy that I use if there's no ROI there.
Yeah. There's another great question here from Mari Vahi, and Mari asked, Sarah, do you have thoughts on charging by value rather than the time that it took or time that it's taken, especially if you're experienced?
Yeah, this is also I think a little bit of a moving target, and especially if your experienced part is something that I am learning more and more about my business as I go too. And so in terms of time versus value, again, there's a piece that I wrote that's in my blog about flat rate versus hourly rate, which talks about some of this. But your clients, especially if it's a new client, not someone that you've worked with over and over again, they're going to think about your time in an hourly rate anyways. And so a lot of people will ask you for an hourly rate so that you can prove to them that you're competitive price to someone else. And I fall into this exact same trap as I get better at what I do too. So when you're experienced, it actually doesn't work well for you to price your time hourly, because you're so efficient at what you do that you get a lot more done in 1 hour than someone else. And so someone who might be just starting out. And so when a client is comparing two proposals together for 2 hourly rates, and they're like, oh, this hourly rate is way lower, you can counteract that a little bit if you're doing hourly rates by just showing the amount of hours it's going to take you. So it is the fact that their rate is lower, but overall it's going to take me less time. I would also say that leaning on your portfolio is going to be a huge value add there too, because you also are you're showing them the quality of work that you can do. So portfolio testimonials, like those kinds of things, are going to go a long way there too, to just show that, like, I know that I may be more expensive than this other person, but I promise it's worth it. That would be what I would say to that.
Very good. Sorry, I'm just conscious. I know you have a couple more slides that you want to get through. So do we want to jump back, and I'll jump out for a second and come back in for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Yep. And then this last part, sorry, let me scroll back to where we were. This last part is pretty quick. I'm just going to go over it really high level. Okay. So the last part around all of this, so once you've thought about what you need to change, you've identified ways to change it, you've hopefully made some of those changes. The other way you can think about being super intentional about your time is creating the conditions for your best work. And I have 4 ways that I like to think about that. The beauty of working for yourself is that you're in control of a lot of these, not always all of these, but you're in control of a lot of these things, where when you work for someone else is often telling you what to do, when to do it, where to do it, and how to do it. So when you have the power to control these things yourself, it can go a long way to not only making you like what you do better every single day, but also be more efficient at what you do. I'm not going to walk through each one of these in depth, but like I said, there are several ways that you can get a more in-depth version of this. But when you're thinking about the what, when, where, and how that you do your best work, keep going. Then you can think about mapping out your ideal time. And so I'm going to walk through a super quick example of this. So let's say I'm that same social media strategist. I want to limit the way I'm responding to emails. So I want to limit it to 2 hours a day, 10 hours a week. I think this is a little bit subjective. It's not going to be exactly that, but it's just around giving yourself some guideposts. And that means 30 minutes, 4 times a day. So like I said, one strategy for email is just setting out some designated times throughout your day. I do that work. I'm going to check my email first thing in the morning on my phone while I'm getting my daughter ready for school. And then I'm going to do that 3 more times throughout the day. Another example of that would be, I want to actually build in some intentional time for skill building. So let's say I want to do that 4 times a week. Or I'm sorry, 4 hours a week. And so I'm going to block out, this 4 hours a week is a lot. Everyone's probably like, there's no way I can spend 4 hours a week on that. Just an example. But say I'm going to block out every Wednesday afternoon. So every Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to spend 4 hours refining my skills, taking a class, doing something else. I do this best when I'm outside of the house, like at a cafe. I can focus more on those kinds of activities. And so that's an example of how you actually can use, you can be super intentional about the way you structure your day, week, and month so that you're doing your best work, creating the conditions for your best work. And this is a quick example. This template is also in the workbook. This is a quick example of what that might look like. So this is actually pretty close to how I try to structure my month. I put some like monthly and weekly pieces on there. So I'm doing a monthly planning. I'm doing some weekly planning. I put those on my calendar. I block out specific days where I'm only working. I'm not doing calls. I'm not doing meetings. And I block out some time for skill building. I block out some time for networking and bookkeeping and billing and those kinds of things that have to get done. But if I put them on my calendar on that specific day, I don't have to worry about the rest of the month. I know that it's there. I know that I'm going to get to it. And I have that structure built in. You'll also see that I'm trying to take 2 Fridays off. So again, being super intentional about how you structure your time so that you're getting what you need. Okay, so that is the framework. And what's going to happen next is that you'll get the workbook and the slides after this. And there's the free challenge on my website that you can sign up for if you want me to walk you through. It's basically recorded videos that walk you through it. And I'll show you in a couple slides. I also am doing this same workshop, a 2-hour version of this workshop for a freelance group in the US in a few weeks. That's free. So you're welcome to join that too, if you want to go a little bit more in depth. And the other things that I'm just going to run through real quick are all the other things that I do to help freelancers. So I have a community that I run with a business partner of mine. She's also a super experienced freelancer. It's called Freelancers Aligned. It is a completely free community for freelancers where you get a forum, resources. We do a live Q&A every month. And I also write a lot. I write a lot of blogs. So you can sign up for that on my website. My business partner and I just launched a podcast called The Freelance Revolution, where we talk about all things freelance. And you can find that basically anywhere that you get your podcasts. On my site, you'll see that I offer a series of templates and courses for freelancers. And there's 3 of them. So there's the startup roadmap, which will help you organize your, basically plan out and organize your business from the get-go. Conversation and contract will give you the tools and processes to take your ideal clients from initial conversation to signed contract, and make sure you're looking out for red flags for clients that you don't want to work for. And then the Project Pro course will give you information. It's basically project management for freelancers. So it'll walk you through how to use professional project management strategies with your clients. I also will be launching a mastermind group in early 2022. I'm accepting applications for that now. This will be a small group. I'm capping it at 15 people, where we'll go through a 6-week process of working together to set goals around our business and make sure those goals happen. And finally, I also offer one-on-one coaching if you need some more individualized support. And here's that information, which I think I saw is in the chat too. Here's some information about those other 2 workshops that I'm going to be offering for free. So the Freelance Hub is based in New York. They're part of the Freelancer Union, which is a US-based group, but it's free and it has tons of great resources for freelancers that are applicable across no matter where you're at. So I'd highly recommend checking them out no matter what. But I'm going to offer a version of this, an extended version of this. And then I'm also offering a free goal setting for solopreneurs, 3-part series workshop. All of those are free through the Freelance Hub. And so you can totally check those out.
Sarah, that's absolutely brilliant. Getting lots of really good feedback here. One from Brian: this has been a great help. I've been doing everything in my head all my business life. May explain why I seldom switch off. So I think that's probably a good example of probably what a lot of people are feeling. All right. I think what you've managed to do in the course of, a breathtaking speed session of kind of put some sort of shape around the way in which people can get hold of their billable and non-billable hours and put some sort of control around their business as individuals. I'm sure there are questions along the way as well. I know there's one here from Amanda. Amanda's asking, how many hours a week do you work, Sarah? Because it looks like you have a one-woman media empire that you're as well as trying to mind your family and everybody else. So it's so many hours a day, many hours a week. Yeah.
I will actually say, I think you'd be surprised. So, and this is another, you will find this on my blog. I very rarely work 40 hours a week. And that has been a journey that has not always been true, but I have learned to make super conscious decisions about what I do and the work that I take on. Is not always, sometimes that is successful, sometimes it is not. But I actually write a lot about that. It's not all, money is 100% important, hard stop. And it's not all about the money. And so I often make a lot of concessions about the amount of money I make a month versus the amount of time I spend. I have a 3-year-old. I am very conscious that that time is going to pass very quickly. And so at least in this period of my life, I place some pretty hard boundaries around the amount of time that I work. But this work that I do, as opposed to like my project management client work, even though I love that too, this work is very much a labor of love. And so I would say that I spend a lot of time on this stuff, maybe more time than I should be, because I just care a lot about helping other freelancers succeed.
Well, we really appreciate it, Sarah. Yeah, when we do our IPO at some point in the distant future, we'll be paying you hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars for the session. So we really appreciate the time that you've given. There's a couple of questions that we got in over the last couple of hours before the session itself, because people are confronted with the time management thing on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah.
You know, and I know you've written quite a bit in your blog posts about kind of, you know, SMART goals, that this thing that we all fall into, that, you know, the SMART acronym of, you know, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals are great up to a point, because we tend to kind of quantify what we do. But you've talked about the qualitative aspect of setting goals. Would you just maybe expand on that for the people who are here?
Yeah, I'd love to. And that session that I'm going to do, this goal setting session, will be like basically all about that too. So if you want to go deeper in that, definitely check that out. And that's also that's the whole basis of the mastermind, just to throw that out there too. So, this is, again, like all of this is like, I do it in my life. Like, I'm not telling anyone to do things that like, I haven't found that work for me. And so I find a lot, me included, people make goals that are like, I want to make X amount of money by X date. And at the end of the day, I push people to think about what does that amount of money give you? So if you made 10 grand less than your target, but you're actually like happy, you are comfortable, your family has what they need. Did you meet your goal, or did you not meet your goal just because you didn't actually meet that exact number? And so I often refer to it as setting goals for the journey and not the destination. So you can a lot of people will set like a long-term goal, 5 years, 10 years out, and life moves fast and changes all the time. I think over the last 2 years, we've learned that things are uncertain, things are constantly going to change, if we didn't already know that before. And so I'm a much bigger believer in setting short-term flexible goals that are focused around what it actually looks like and feels like to be successful, not what that number is, but what do I want to have? What do I want to do? How do I want to feel at the end of this? How many hours do I want to be working is completely subjective, but like, what do I want to be able to do with my time is probably a better gauge to work with.
One of the things that, again, we know from experience is that it's very difficult when you're working on your own and working as a freelancer to say no to clients. So it's kind of the art of saying no, because we always get asked to do informal stuff, or will you do this as well and then not get paid for it? So is there a way in which you could maybe advise some of our people to say how to say no in the nicest possible way?
Yeah, I mean, this is also a moving target, and there's no there's no straight answer, but basically it's always like a value proposition. And you're inevitably going to make mistakes. Like I totally, took on work that like, I was like, oh, that's really good money. Turns out that was like not probably what I should have done. And so I think it's, if you go through a process of really thinking about, which is what I'll do in this goal setting workshop, if you go through a process of really thinking about that qualitative piece of it, what does it look like and feel like? What do I want my life and my business to look like? That can be your North Star, which inevitably your North Star is going to shift and change over time. But then you're able to look at something and say, I'm going to aim towards that. So I'm going to take on this work, which maybe isn't exactly what I want to do, but I want to build this relationship. And so I'm going to do it. I may be making slightly less than I normally would, but over time, it's going to get me closer to where I want to go. But yeah, I mean, I think like saying no is, like I said, I'm at a stage in my life where I say no to a lot. And it's because I want to place super clear boundaries around my work so that I can actually be focused on my life.
The other thing I suppose that we all fall into is these kind of to-do lists. So I have one myself that seems to go on for pages and pages and you never get to the end of it. So again, any advice that you'd give people? Is it a trap, you know, having to-do lists? Or, you know, they work obviously for some people, they don't work for everybody, but I would guess every freelance person on the call here today has a to-do list that includes client work and then a whole range of other stuff that's related to their business and to their life. Yeah.
I use a couple of different, I think, find tools that work the best for you. And that again, will always shift over time. It's never going to stay the same. I use a system where I create a to-do list. Like I have like my daily tasks and things like that I keep in a calendar app that I use. But, I make a to-do list each quarter and then I filter that down into the month. So like things that don't happen in March, and these are like things that didn't have to happen in March. So mostly things for my own business that I'm able to put off, not client work. Things that didn't, here's the things I want to accomplish in March. If they didn't happen, they can filter over into April, but here are like the must-have things that I have to check off. Here are the things that could shift down the road. I think that's also like part of that value versus effort. For the bigger things on your to-do list, it's part of that value versus effort equation. But I actually find for me that I use my calendar more than to-do lists. And that's where I'm actually able to block out those pieces of time. So I'm like, I have to get this done. So I block out 90 minutes to do it on my calendar instead of writing it on my to-do list, because sometimes you write things on your list, but it's the translation into how much time that's actually going to take you doesn't actually work in the amount of time.
That's a really good tip. Yeah, it's absolutely a really good tip. And just one final thing that I think you've touched on it again, and it's great to see that you've touched on it, is that kind of thing about personal development and setting time aside for sort of self-development, learning and so on, because again, it's something that we try and advise every freelancer to do, because, and it is very difficult when you're running your own business and you're focused on client work, that you need to set some time aside to develop skills, because particularly in the area of marketing services and creativity and digital and so on, it's constantly evolving. So again, any advice that you might impart for people there, that would be great. Yeah.
I would say the same thing around that North Star concept. So thinking about like, what do you actually, so like another example from my own life, I am prioritizing right now, like my personal life a little bit more over my work life. And that means that like, maybe when my daughter, in like 5 years, when my daughter's older and doesn't think I'm cool anymore, I'm going to spend more time spending a lot more time doing things like that to develop myself. Not that I don't do those things now, I 100% do, but I would say that building in the time to do that is making sure that it's actually connected with like that where you want to go piece. Because a lot of people also are like, oh, I want to learn how to do this, I want to learn how to do this, but if it's not connected to that overarching goal, then you're not going to actually have the drive to do it. So I would say definitely block out that time intentionally, but also just like make sure it's not arbitrary. Like I think a lot of people do things like that because they think that it's what they should be doing. So if you're going to, whatever you choose to do, make sure it's connected to where you want to go.
That's great. I'm just again really conscious. Speaking of time, we're definitely up against, and we're taking liberties with your time. We've just gone past 2 o'clock. Una, do you want to finish up on anything yourself?
No, just really to the feedback that we're getting from the group has just been fantastic, Sarah. So thanks a million for that. I think what's really interesting is that you've kind of provided something that is actually very easy to implement, and you can see immediately how it would be very useful to so many people. I think the feedback that we're getting from the people here on the webinar is that listening to you talking is very life affirming in terms of the decisions that they've made to carve out their own path. So yeah, just to echo what Peter says, I really appreciate you getting up and doing this and getting up so early and doing it.
No problem.
Thank you, Sarah.